A woman named Sigrid Bjornsdottir got married in Greenland. The church was built from stone, the ceremony was witnessed, the names were recorded. 3 letters written between 1409 and 1424 mention the wedding, and they describe a normal community, an ordered life, a Sunday in an ordinary village at the edge of the known world. Nobody wrote about hunger. Nobody wrote about fear. Then silence. By 1420, every single one of the 5,000 Norse settlers in Greenland had vanished from history. No graves with the right dates, no farewell letters, no ships that made it back to Norway carrying survivors or news. 5,000 people simply stopped appearing in any record, anywhere. For 600 years, the answer seemed obvious. The climate cooled, the ice advanced, and the cold killed them. That explanation is wrong. And the true answer buried for centuries in the sediment layers beneath Norse farmsteads points directly to a single animal that nobody ever thought to look at. To understand what happened, you first have to understand what the Norse actually built in Greenland, because most people dramatically underestimate it. In 985 AD, a man named Erik the Red led 25 ships westward from Iceland. He had been exiled twice, once from Norway, once from Iceland for manslaughter. He was not someone who processed setbacks quietly. He sailed west, spent 3 years mapping the southwestern fjords of a massive island, and came back with a plan and a name. He called it Greenland. Not because it was green. Most of it is buried under 2 kilometers of ice. He called it Greenland because he understood something about human nature that most leaders don't. People will follow a good name into places they would never follow an honest one. 14 of his 25 ships arrived. The others were sunk or turned back by storms. But 14 ships carrying settlers and livestock was enough to establish something. What they built was not a temporary camp. The Norse Greenland settlements, the eastern settlement in the far south, the western settlement, 400 kilometers up the coast, eventually held between 4,000 and 5,000 people. They had a bishop. They had a cathedral. They traded walrus ivory to mainland Europe, where it was carved into chess pieces, altar furnishings, and sword handles for kings. For nearly 300 years, the colony functioned. But here is the question that nobody thought to ask at the time, and that historians ignored for centuries afterward. What were they eating? That question turns out to be the only question that matters. In the 1970s, a young archaeologist from the City University of New York began excavating Norse Greenland settlement sites. His name was Thomas McGovern, and over the next 4 decades he cataloged something that no one had systematically looked at before: the bones. Thousands of bone fragments from Norse middens, longhouses, farmsteads, and the bishop's estate. Each fragment was cleaned, measured, identified, and entered into a record that slowly built a picture of exactly what the Norse Greenland colony was eating and when. What the earliest settlement layers showed was clear. Musk oxen were everywhere. The musk ox is not the kind of animal that appears in Viking sagas. It does not carry the mythology of the wolf or the bear. It is slow, heavy, and by the standards of large Arctic mammals, extraordinarily calm. An adult weighs up to 400 kilograms. A single animal provided roughly 200 kilograms of usable meat, enough to sustain a Norse family through 3 weeks of a Greenland winter. Its underwool, called kiviat, is 8 times warmer than sheep's wool by weight. Its bones became tools. Its hide became clothing. The Norse did not have to travel far to find musk oxen. The animals did not migrate. They lived in the same valleys and hillsides, season after season, generation after generation. And there is something you have to understand about how musk oxen respond to a threat. They form a circle. When predators approach wolves, primarily musk ox herds pull together into a defensive formation. Adults face outward, horns lowered, calves protected in the center. They hold the circle and wait. The strategy evolved over millions of years and works exceptionally well against wolves, which need a separated, panicking animal to make a kill. Against organized human hunters arriving with spears and dogs, the defensive circle is a slaughterhouse formation. The herd holds still, the hunters move in. Every animal in the circle can be killed in a single coordinated hunt. McGovern's bone data from the 10th and 11th centuries told a story of extraordinary abundance. Musk, ox bones in every layer. In the farmsteads and the cathedral waste pits and the outlying homesteads. The civilization of Norse Greenland was built on this animal. And Norse Greenland was systematically destroying it. Here is the biology that the Norse had no way of knowing, and that no one in medieval Europe had any reason to understand. The musk ox reproduces slowly. A female reaches sexual maturity at 2 years old. She gives birth to 1 calf per year, sometimes every 2 years. Each calf takes 2 to 3 years to reach a size worth hunting. The herd grows only as fast as its youngest members allow. This is what population biologists call a K strategy: high investment per offspring, slow recovery from losses. The species evolved in an environment where predation was significant but not relentless, and where slow reproduction was an acceptable trade for producing large, robust young. The Norse had no experience with this kind of animal. Every large prey species they had hunted in Norway and Iceland was different. Wild boar, red deer, elk. These animals produce multiple offspring per year. They recover quickly from hunting pressure. They had been hunted by European populations for thousands of years, and the populations persisted. Norse hunting practice was built on the assumption that prey animals replaced themselves. The musk ox did not. McGovern's bone layers showed the collapse in slow motion across centuries. In the 11th century, musk ox bones were abundant. In the 12th century, still present, slightly reduced. In the 13th century, noticeably thinner. By the 14th century, they were almost gone from Norse settlement sites entirely. The Norse had not been unlucky. They had been thorough. And this is where the Little Ice Age argument collapses. Because the cold arrived at roughly the same time the musk ox population was collapsing, and historians conflated 2 separate crises into one explanation. Yes, temperatures dropped in the 1300s. Yes, fjords iced over earlier. Yes, growing seasons shortened. But the Inuit were in Greenland during the same period. Same temperatures. Same ice. Same shortened seasons. The Inuit did not collapse. The Inuit survived, and then expanded. As Norse settlements went dark in the 15th century, Inuit communities were moving into exactly the coastlines the Norse had abandoned. The difference between the 2 groups was not resilience in some vague sense. It was one specific skill. The Inuit hunted ringed seals from kayaks. Seals lived beneath the ice year-round. They maintained breathing holes that an experienced hunter could locate and wait beside for hours. The technique required specific knowledge, specific tools, and a specific relationship with the frozen sea. The Norse had none of that. They came from a world where meat came from land, and the ocean was for fishing from open boats. Without the musk ox to sustain them through winter, they needed the sea. Without the skills to take what the sea offered, they had almost nothing. Dr. Niels Linderup at the University of Copenhagen did something remarkable with the skeletal remains of Norse Greenlanders. He analyzed the nitrogen isotopes preserved in their bone tissue. Nitrogen isotopes act as a chemical record of everything a person ate throughout their life. Different food sources leave different signatures: land animals, marine animals, plants. Each leaves a fingerprint that is preserved in bone for centuries. The bones of early Norse Greenlanders showed the signatures of a land-based diet: cattle, musk, ox, caribou. Marine protein was present, but minimal. The bones of Norse Greenlanders from the 13th and 14th centuries told a different story. The marine signature was growing. The land signature was shrinking. They were adapting. They were beginning to eat more seal, more fish. The shift was happening. But it was happening at the pace of generations, in a world that was changing at the pace of decades. The musk ox was gone. The climate was cooling. The trade ships from Norway were already arriving less frequently. because the walrus ivory market in Europe had been undercut by elephant ivory arriving from Africa. The economic reason to maintain the colony was fading at the same rate the biological one was failing. And then there are the children. Harris lines are horizontal bands of dense bone tissue that form during periods of severe growth arrest, which is what happens to a developing skeleton when a child stops getting enough food. The body pauses its growth. When nutrition returns, growth resumes. The moment of arrest is preserved permanently as a line in the bone. One Harris line means one episode of severe malnutrition. 2 means 2. 3 means 3. The children of the final Norse Greenland generation carried multiple Harris lines, not 1 or 2, multiple episodes of starvation before adulthood. These were not isolated bad winters. This was a food system in collapse, written into the skeletons of children who could not understand what was happening to them or why. The cattle from the final settlement layers were stunted. Where early Norse Greenland cattle stood 120 centimeters at the shoulder, the animals recovered from the last farmsteads stood barely 100. Smaller bodies, less meat, less fat, a food supply diminishing generation by generation. And in the final excavation layers in the rooms of the last Norse farmsteads, archaeologists found dog bones with cut marks. In Norse culture, as in most European medieval cultures, eating a working dog was a last resort. The kind of decision made when everything else was gone. These were not dogs that had died naturally. They had been butchered. Whoever made those cuts was not doing it by choice. No one knows exactly when the last Norse Greenlander died. No one knows whether they left on a ship or stayed in their farms until the end. The archaeological record simply stops. The settlement layers end. The bones stop appearing. The last letter from Greenland was written around 1424. It mentions the 1408 wedding as a recent memory. It asks about church matters in Iceland. Nothing in it suggests catastrophe. Perhaps, by 1424, catastrophe was no longer something that required mentioning. Thomas McGovern spent 4 decades reading what the soil of Norse Greenland had preserved. The picture he assembled was not the one history had always assumed. The Norse were not killed by an enemy. They were not overwhelmed by a climate they couldn't predict or control. They were undone by a process they started themselves, the systematic removal of the one animal their civilization depended on, conducted across 3 centuries without anyone understanding what was being lost. The muskox is still in Greenland. The species survived because the populations that remained in the far north were never subjected to the same hunting pressure. The animal outlasted the civilization that depended on it. For 30 million years, the muskox has held its ground. It forms the circle. It lowers its horns. It waits for the threat to pass. It waited out the Norse too. That 1408 wedding at Hvalsey Church was not the beginning of the end. The end had already been written in the bone layers of the 12th and 13th centuries, in the declining muskox counts that no one tracked and no one noticed until a researcher from New York started counting fragments 600 years later. Sigrid Bjornsdottir got married in a stone church on a Sunday in September. The witnesses signed their names. The community went home. The muskox was already gone from their territory. The children were already carrying the lines. And nobody, not a single person at that wedding, understood what the silence in the hills around them actually meant. To stay updated on our next videos, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and share it with your friends and family.